Hey everyone, welcome back to another Explainer. Today, we are diving into something absolutely wild. We're unpacking one of the most chilling and just enduring unsolved mysteries in all of American history. It's a case that has completely fascinated and frustrated investigators, journalists, and amateur sleuths for nearly 8 decades. Yep, we're talking about the Black Dahlia. I'm going to guide you through exactly what happened, the incredibly chaotic investigation that followed, and the prime suspects who might have just gotten away with the perfect crime.
So, to really grasp the sheer horror of this case, we've got to drop right into the exact moment the mystery began. Picture this, okay? It's January 15th, 1947. A young mother named Betty Berzinger is walking her 3-year-old daughter down a really quiet, half-built street in the Limer Park neighborhood of Los Angeles. It's a chilly morning. There are these vacant lots just scattered everywhere between the new houses. And as she's walking, she spots something pale and entirely still, just lying in the weeds. At first, she thinks somebody has just dumped a broken store mannequin right there in the grass.
But as she gets a little closer, the horrifying reality kind of washes over her. It is not a mannequin. Betty Berzinger has just discovered the severely mutilated body of a 22-year-old woman. She immediately grabs her daughter, runs to a nearby house, and frantically calls the police. And that single terrifying morning sparks an investigation that remains completely unsolved 79 years later.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the contrast here. The sheer brutality of the crime scene was somehow matched by this shocking, almost surgical precision. The victim's body had been cleanly cut in half at the waist. We're talking surgically clean, with no jagged tearing at all. Flesh had been deliberately removed, and her mouth had been slashed from the corners up toward her ears, leaving this awful disfigurement that pop culture would later call a Glasgow smile. But here is the most chilling detail of the whole thing. There was zero blood on the ground. Literally not a single drop. That told detectives right away that she was killed somewhere else, completely drained of blood, and then meticulously transported and posed in that vacant lot.
Section 1. Who was Elizabeth Short? Because behind the grisly headlines, there was a real person.
You know, so much of this case has literally been swallowed whole by tabloid sensationalism. So let's separate fact from fiction here. Looking at the myth versus the reality. She actually wasn't famous at all. The myth paints her as the Black Dahlia, this glamorous Hollywood actress navigating the dark, seedy underbelly of the film industry. But the reality? It's far more grounded and, honestly, far more tragic. Elizabeth Short had absolutely zero known acting credits. She was an out-of-work waitress from Boston who was just like countless other young women of her generation, chasing a Hollywood dream that didn't really exist. Even the nickname, the Black Dahlia, was totally invented by the press after she died, probably inspired by the 1946 film noir The Blue Dahlia.
Because Elizabeth's actual path to Los Angeles? Man, it was a rough one. She was born in Boston back in 1924, the third of 5 daughters. She survived the absolute grueling years of the Great Depression, a time when her father actually abandoned the family by faking his own suicide. He literally just left his car on a bridge and vanished. Years later, he resurfaced out in California, and a teenage Elizabeth moved out west to try and reconnect with him. From there, she kind of just drifted. She lived in rented rooms, crashed with friends, and moved transiently through the very glitzy but incredibly dangerous nightlife of post-war Hollywood.
And that brings us to a frankly staggering number for the detectives to unpack: 50. By the time of her tragic death, investigators determined that Elizabeth had been socially, romantically, or professionally involved with up to 50 different men. Post-war Los Angeles was absolutely packed with ex-servicemen, low-level criminals, and predators. She was navigating a highly volatile social scene, just floating from person to person trying to survive. And you can imagine this made tracking her final days an absolute nightmare for detectives.
Okay, let's dive into this. Section 2. The investigation spirals into a chaotic frenzy.
But right before the chaos really kicked in, there was this one moment of incredible efficiency. 56 minutes. That is exactly how long it took the FBI to identify Elizabeth Short's body. They used this primitive fax machine called a sound photo to transmit her fingerprints across the country. It honestly remains one of the fastest victim identifications in the Bureau's entire history. But unfortunately for everyone involved, identifying the victim was the only easy part of this case.
As we trace this timeline from January 15th through the 24th, you can see how things just escalate into a total media circus. January 15th. The body is discovered. Just 4 days later, on January 19th, police arrest Robert "Red" Manley. He was a married traveling salesman and the last known person to see her alive, but he passes a polygraph and is completely cleared.
Then, on January 24th, the case takes a really terrifying turn. The killer actively inserts themselves into the narrative by mailing a package directly to the local newspapers.
Inside that package, Elizabeth Short's personal papers and her address book. And right alongside them was this incredibly eerie note pieced together by cutting individual letters out of newspaper headlines. It read, "Here is Dahlia's belongings. Letter to follow." I mean, just imagine being the postal inspector intercepting that. The killer was directly taunting the authorities and playing right to the press.
And let me tell you, the press in 1947 LA, they were more than happy to play along. It was a fiercely competitive newspaper scene. Reporters were literally racing each other for exclusive scoops, doing things that would get a case thrown out of court in a heartbeat today. They walked freely through crime scenes, trampled on evidence, they even intercepted physical evidence right out of the hands of the police. To make matters even worse, the media frenzy sparked this wild psychological epidemic where dozens of innocent people actually came forward to falsely confess to the murder. Some of them just wanted the attention, while others genuinely seemed to suffer a psychological break and truly believed they had done it. So, because of all this constant interference and just the sheer volume of false leads, the whole investigation basically hits a brick wall. A massive one. By the time a Los Angeles grand jury reviewed the case in 1949, they found that an astonishing 192 suspects had been evaluated and dismissed. The grand jury's conclusion wasn't necessarily that the police had botched the investigation, but rather that they had simply entirely run out of leads.
Section 3. The prime suspects. So who actually did it?
Well, arguably the most chilling name on that entire list is Dr. George Hodel. And what makes this suspect so fascinating is that the most compelling case against him was actually built by his own son. Yep, Steve Hodel, a retired LAPD homicide detective. In his 2003 book, Black Dahlia Avenger, Steve revealed that his father not only had the exact medical and surgical knowledge required to perform those specific mutilations, but that he was actually an original LAPD suspect way back in 1947. The police were so suspicious of Dr. Hodel, in fact, that they physically bugged his house in 1950.
And on one of those secret police wiretaps, they allegedly caught Dr. Hodel saying this, and this gives me chills. He says, "Supposing I did kill the Black Dahlia, they couldn't prove it now." I mean, it is an incredibly unsettling piece of audio. However, we do have to remain objective here. This is entirely circumstantial evidence. The context of the recording is highly disputed, and the LAPD never actually formally charged George Hodel before his death.
Now, aside from Hodel, there are definitely other tantalizing names floating around. You've got Jack Anderson Wilson, who an LAPD detective firmly believed was tied to a string of other torso murders, but Wilson conveniently died in a fire in 1982 before they could ever arrest him. There's Mark Hansen, this wealthy nightclub owner Short had stayed with, who happened to have deep, corrupt ties to the LAPD. And then there are the much wilder, broader theories connecting the murder to the Cleveland torso murders of the 1930s, or even floating the idea that it was an early work of the Zodiac Killer. But the absolutely crucial point here is this. Every single one of these theories suffers from a total, complete absence of definitive proof.
Section 4. Why it still matters. The lasting impact.
And this brilliantly illustrates the lasting legal impact of the tragedy. A lot of true crime retrospectives completely skip over this fact, but Elizabeth Short's unsolved murder directly changed American law. Just 2 weeks after she was killed, a California lawmaker introduced a bill demanding a state registry for sex offenders. It passed, making California the very first state in the U.S. to mandate a sex offender registry. And that framework eventually spread to cover the entire country. Her tragedy is literally the foundation of a major piece of legislation that we still heavily rely on nearly 80 years later.
And culturally, the case just absolutely refuses to die. It is permanently woven into the fabric of Los Angeles. It inspired James Ellroy's massive 1987 novel, Brian De Palma's 2006 film adaptation, and just countless TV segments on shows like Unsolved Mysteries. People are still actively investigating it today. As recently as 2013, a retired police sergeant brought a cadaver dog to George Hodel's former house, and they allegedly found the scent of human decomposition right there in the basement. Hollywood essentially took a vulnerable girl chasing a dream and turned her into its darkest leading character.
Which brings us right back to the ultimate question. Who do you think did it? Was it Dr. George Hodel, hiding in plain sight with his surgical precision? Was it a powerful nightclub owner protected by corrupt cops? Or was it a total phantom that the LAPD never even had on their radar? Drop your theories in the comments below. I would absolutely love to hear how you piece all this evidence together. And hey, if you enjoyed this explainer and want more deep dives into history's most fascinating mysteries, make sure to hit that subscribe button. We are just getting started.